Holla ballers, look into my eyes of the survival hunter. Look at him and drink it in. Oh yes. What I wanted to do today was actually take a little look at the survival hunter while we're still in early gear. We are capped and we're about 807, so we're like getting ready to go into the gearing process where often our ideas on classes can change. Now, the purpose of what I'm doing today is really to look and see what I believe were the big issues with survival and see if that actually carries through to when we're geared up and does a lot of the problems people might see with survival actually alleviate. So what are we trying to cure here? Well, many people would say, and have said, that even if survival was doing very competitive damage in the PvE world, which it is not, so I will point out that people don't mind survival at all in PvP, but of course we are a PvE-centric channel, so we're going to look at it from that direction, they wouldn't play it anyway. Right, which is a bold statement. I'm not going to play it. Now, is that a case of boycotting the spec because hunters never wanted a melee spec in the first place? Is that for any millions of reasons that anybody could come up with why the survival spec was mostly abandoned by the player base? And that's an interesting thing to come back to, because I can't say why people didn't want to play survival. I can guess, but what the actual reason is not going to be anything I can particularly point out here. But what I can say is what I believe were major misses by Blizz with the survival spec. Now, is the survival spec completely abandoned? No, not at all. There is, as always, when Blizzard introduces something new, there's going to be a subsection of the player base who really enjoys it. And there are guys who play survival as a main spec. But it's fair to say that, for the most part, one, because it didn't do competitive damage in PvE, and it isn't a ranged spec and people chose Hunter probably with that in mind, and the gameplay is very, very off-putting in many ways, that most people left it behind, and therefore what is still playing Survival are very much fans of it, and they very much enjoy it, but I don't think that's representative of the player base as a whole, or the Hunter player base as a whole. I think that'd be fair to say, without trying to step on any toes. I'm glad some people enjoy this, but I think it's definitely worth mentioning that there's not a lot of survival hunters out there. Now, again, that can be for many reasons. So, let's take a look at what I believe are the problems with survival after leveling with it, playing with it, doing some world quests, and doing a few of the starter dungeons with it, and doing some PvE stuff, okay? So, here it is in a fucking nutshell. Firstly, the spec, for me, I think we could make a pretty solid goddamn argument that this spec is unfinished. Very, very unfinished, because there's so much lack of nuance that goes on with this spec in its early days. Early days is very important to make an impression. If this spec did something cool, people would be interested in it. It doesn't. Survival does absolutely nothing cool. If we look at the animations for the most part, they're nothing particular stand out. Dropping an explosive trap looks quite cool. It throws the bomb up. That's quite good. But other than that, not really, right? We're not seeing anything here that's like pretty cool other than the slight slide that we get on the traps. That's kind of okay. Mongoose Bite, which is our primary attack, is just a swinging animation. Flanking Strike, which is another one of our main attacks, doesn't particularly do anything good. Murder of Crows is something we've seen before. Using our Lacerate is kind of a leaping attack, nothing we haven't seen before. Dragonfire Grenade, again, nothing particular special there. And our main artifact ability, which is called Fury of the Eagle, is kind of a very lackluster Fists of Fury. As you can see, it's this green animation that's going on here. Yeah, not the best. Not the best by any means. So, that's a big problem. Can we compare that to anything else? Sure we can, right? Sure we can. We can compare it to things like Outlaw that had Cannon Barrage. Roll the Bones is a wonderful animation and does really cool things when it works right. It does have its own problems, but when it works right, it looks really, really nice. If we look at other specs historically, the Death Knight that started with Army of the Dead, Death Grip, Death and Decay, all these very cool standout things. Fucking people wanted that spec to work regardless of its damage, right? Because it just looks cool. The same with the Windwalker Monk. You're flying Serpent Kicking, you're spinning Crane Kicking, you're doing all these cool things. Their Fist of Fury looks much better. Then people want that spec to work because it looks fucking amazing. Yeah, I want to play this spec. It looks really cool. And we can say the same thing about the Havoc Demon Hunter as well. When that was brought in, you're instantaneously brought into a world where you're jumping and gliding and you're doing all these things, and pretty soon you've got things like I-Beam, right? And then, within an hour you've got Metamorphosis where you're turning into a giant demon, and you're like, yeah, this is pretty fucking cool. So they really missed the boat on making anything particularly stand out. Even the Harpoon, which doesn't work apparently on training dummies, which is a charge, Often fails actually in the real world, which is a real shame, which is supposed to be your gap closer. You can compare that to Heroic Leap. You can compare it to Light's Charge for the Paladins. All these things that just look considerably more fun, right? They look way more fun. The survival just doesn't do anything particularly fun. And I think that's an instant turn-off, especially in a current day World of Warcraft, which is very much has outstanding over-the-top animations for many, many, many specs. And I know some people will be like, well, my spec doesn't. Not all of them, but for the most part. Particularly when you're having a new spec, I think it's important to have something pretty standout going on there, which we simply do not have. Okay, what's next? The pet. Why is it here? What is it supposed to do? I guess class fantasy, but it really feels tacked on, and it doesn't feel like any thought really went into the pet whatsoever. It actually has no real interaction other than real sort of tacked on interaction. So tacked on interaction would be something like Flanking Strike, which is kill command, really, that we've had forever. But Flanking Strike, as the pet attacks, have a chance to give you a charge of Mongoose Bite. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that's really about it. Right, that's really about it. We can have our main DPS cooldown, which is Aspect of the Eagle, which doubles the chance of our pet giving us this Mongoose Bite stack. Other than that, what's your pet here for? What's his purpose? I think a lot of it came down to, isn't it cool that you're melee, but you have a permanent tank with you? Kind of. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty nifty, I suppose, but do I have to have a pet and all the problems that come with pets just for that sort of feeling? I like I'll be honest here, I'm not moaning about having a pet. I quite like the idea of this melee guy out with his eagle spear and his pet, but I would love the pet to have some involvement in what I do, really. And he doesn't. He doesn't really do a goddamn thing, and that's a real shame. Again, pointing to this unfinished nature is the golden traits are some of the worst we've seen in the game. So you've got aspects of the Sky Lord, where aspects of the eagle increases all damage you deal. Alright, during its duration. That's okay. We have Talon Strike. Your basic attacks have a chance to trigger 2 additional rapid blows. That's a golden trait, bear in mind. Okay. And Eagle's Bite. Harpoon applies on the trail a unique damage over time effect that deals damage over 12 seconds, and your melee auto attacks extended duration. So what does that translate into? You harpoon to something. Not that it works here. Yep. You harpoon to something, you get a free dot. And that's it. It'll stay on the target. As long as you harpoon the target, it'll just stay on there because your melee auto attacks are going to extend it. Pretty goddamn unfinished. So those are 2 starter issues, okay? The pet really meaning nothing, and obviously the artifact issue, and the fact it doesn't do cool. So there's 3 things there that are real problems with survival. Coming back down to the idea, though, that if it did great damage, I wouldn't play it anyway. So what's really the gameplay like in this early gear? Well, it's got some obvious issues. Again, hasn't it? It's got some real obvious issues that honestly sometimes just lead you going, ugh, because there's no other class in the game that really suffers the same way survival does with some issues. Now, I will point out here, it's perfectly playable, right? I have dungeon footage of me just dominating, and that's obviously going to change as we start getting into with playing alongside some very high geared people until we get some gear. But generally speaking, it works, right? There's nothing here that says it doesn't work. The problem is it's not that fun to get, in my opinion. And you're going to work very, very hard to get results that other specs just don't have to deal with. Now, we're going to walk into the territory here of people saying, I quite like a very, very busy over the spec with lots and lots of things to do. That's great. But the general world of gamers, and this is historically true in all cases, will always choose the path of least resistance, right? Always choose the path of least resistance. So if you hand a spec to somebody that requires really nice timer management, along with a whole multitude of miniature cooldowns to manage as well, and that might sometimes pull off good results, compared to a spec that can press Blade Storm and be done with it, people are going to choose Blade Storm in nearly 100% of occasions. Right? That's generally how the world works. Although you personally might enjoy a spec that has very, very busy plate spinning is what we generally call it, is spinning plates like you'll see on the streets in most cities. If somebody has to choose between spinning a load of plates or just pressing 3 or 4 buttons that kind of line up nicely and don't really screw you over too badly, people are generally going to go with the latter option there. So how does this work then? Well, the whole spec is based on an RNG mechanic, which is never a good start. And the way they've made this is that the spec is based on RNG, but they've then had to augment the chance of it being RNG. So this is why, and you'll probably know the RNG now, is generating these charges of Mongoose. So why is that? So I imagine many of you actually don't know how a survival hunter plays. So a very quick overview is you had this flanking strike kill command. You have things like Dragonfire grenades, which come from talents. If I switch over to here, Dragonfire grenades, you can add things like spitting cobras, throwing axes, which is quite a nice little spell, murder of crows, and these are all little tiny cooldowns. Now, the most optimal way of playing this is a very similar spec to what I have now. It includes something called Way of the Mock Nathal. I will never ever play with this. I hate it. It actually is exactly what Warriors had on the beta, and they cried murder. That this spell, this kind of ability was fucking removed because it is awful in real-world PvE scenarios. Once we're actually in the game, it's terrible. Somebody might sim that it works really well, and you might find odd bosses where it works really well, but generally speaking, it's fucking garbage, and we don't want anything to do with it. And we also throw in Explosive Trap, and we also throw in a Lacerate. Now, this is also a problem. Some of these things don't make sense, particularly Lacerate. So, Lacerate tears a bleeding wound. It's rend. But it has a cooldown for some reason. It's like every 10 seconds we can make something bleed with our giant spear. Okay, I mean, I don't really get it. It makes them bleed for 12 with a 10-second cooldown, which means you have this little window where you can apply it. And this whole spec revolves around these little windows where you can do stuff. So if you're not sure what I mean, something with a 10-second cooldown that causes something to bleed for 12 seconds leaves you a 2-second window to refresh it. Okay, you have a 2-second window where you can actually refresh that spell. And it doesn't do much of anything, really. You can augment it to do stuff, but generally it just lacerates. What's confusing on the back of that, while Lacerate doesn't make sense, is why does Serpent Sting suddenly make its appearance down in the bottom tier? Why is Lacerate not linked to poisons, which would make it somewhat make sense, like you're reapplying the poison, you could say. Serpent Sting is there. It's here, okay? But it's only when you, like, AoE or use Raptor Strike, is like, now you apply Serpent Sting, which deals damage over 15 seconds. And it's, like, auto-applied by your other attacks. So why are these not two linked together? That would kind of make sense, because it makes sense that you would poison your spear. That kind of makes sense. We almost thought they'd go with a Game of Thrones style reference to the Red Viper, I want to say. Is he called the Viper, Andy? I'm the Red Viper, and I would kill you, my sister. That guy. He poisons his spear. I kind of felt like they were going to go down that path. But they haven't committed to it at all. Which, again, this kind of feels unfinished why Serpent Sting appears here and doesn't involve Lacerate in some way. But either way, it does. We can read too much into that if we wish. But going forward, let's look at how this actually plays. So this RNG mechanic revolves around this Mongoose Bite. So Mongoose Bite is an attack that opens, again, another window. And this window lasts for 14 seconds. And again, it's got a really edgelord, silly name, which I think will off-put a lot of the older gamers now, which is attempts to sever limbs with a brutal attack. Now, the sad thing is, this severing limbs brutal attack does less damage than your other attacks, which is really irritating. But what it does do is open this window, as you can see here, for 14 seconds. And what you can do is you can stack this up to 6. Okay, as you see, I've got 3 stacks of it. Now, every Mongoose Bite I do within this window, yeah, will do 50% more damage, and then the window closes. So it doesn't refresh the window, but everything I stack in there will do windows. Now, what's even more annoying about this is our main artifact ability, this Fury of the Eagle, is actually tied to that stacking buff. If you get the maximum stacks, which is 6, it will do its most potential damage. So in PvE, we want that 100% of the time. You can probably see where I'm going here now, is that it's kind of RNG whether or not you'll get the stacks to even reach 6. And if you don't reach 6, as with anything in WoW, if you don't reach its potential, it feels really lackluster and annoying, right? So the way they've done it is to augment this with other stuff. So things like Flanking Strike has double the chance. So the ability to proc Mongoose Bite stacks is called Hunting Companion. And it's from your pet. Your pet attacks have chances to do this, which means if your pet's not attacking, you're really fucked. If your pet gets stuck somewhere and you don't notice for a few seconds, you're screwed, as we well know. Again, kind of like, can we make the pet more interesting so I'm not just relying on this for the entire spec to work? Flanking Strike, which is kill command essentially, both you and your pet attack, has double the chance to cause this proc to occur. Not guaranteeing it, okay? We also have Aspect of the Eagle, like I mentioned earlier, which grants an additional extra chance for it to proc, and also it's tied kind of to the Mastery. Mastery Hunting Companion. Your pet's chances have a chance to generate Mongoose Bite. So again, they've made this ridiculous RNG system, which your main artifact ability is reliant upon. Now, I just want to put this in context. Think about your artifact abilities. Do they really rely on anything else to work. Not for the most part, right? Not for the most part, they don't. My Phoenix Flames as a fire mage don't rely on me getting 5 fireball crits in a row or something along those lines, or having a succession amount of other things. It just exists and it works. You can think of Fury of the Illidari, I believe is the Havoc one, has no such issues. Right? These things don't have these issues. And what else is important here, they certainly don't need a absolute minimum of 6 global cooldowns to activate something that's every 45 seconds. That's a long time. It's a really long time, particularly when it probably won't take you 6. You've got to throw flanking strikes in there. And not only that, you're going to want to be using these other resources, because as PvE players, we kind of want to keep them on cooldown, which can brings up this spinning plates idea. It should all start to make sense to you now. So your general gameplay looks something like getting rid of some mongoose, opening the window, flanking strike on cooldown. You see the way it procs it there? Trying to get up to 6. Now we've got nothing to do, so now we start throwing other things in. And then we're going to flanking strike. But our window's closing now. You can see I've got 2 seconds left. And it didn't get it. I didn't get the 6 stacks. And therefore, I didn't actually use my Fury of the Eagle. Now, the RNG on this, at least in early gear, which is why I think it's important we talk about this now, because this is when people will have tried the spec out and gone, okay, this isn't really for me. The RNG on this spec is obviously like annoying because you didn't use your main DPS cooldown. Now on the pull it's not too much of an issue because you'll probably have aspects of the eagle up and stuff, so you can kind of make it work, you get the extra chances, but going throughout the fight it happens all the time and it makes you very, very frustrated because you can use Fury of the Eagle for a number of things, either a big DPS cooldown on the boss or maybe you're closing in. You'll actually notice if I skip over to some game footage now, there. If we skip over some game footage now, you'll actually see on bosses and on trash is Fury of the Eagle actually does tremendous amounts of damage. But oftentimes you're actually trying to get it to work. Now there are legendaries and stuff which again further augment this process, mainly reducing the cooldown of aspects of the Eagle, which allow you to kind of make up for these massive shortfalls. And I think it's fair to say these are huge, huge shortfalls that the Survival Hunter suffers from. Just absolutely massive shortfalls where the spec is frustrating and irritating to play. Whereas most of the specs in the game just simply don't have that issue and don't need this kind of really over-the-top ramp-up time to get going. So that's what I feel about it now. Those are like the 4 major issues. We're going to get some more gear and then we're going to talk about possible solutions in the next video. So thank you so much for listening, guys, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.